Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another short YouTube reading guide series. Today is the last of 3 videos walking through the correct reading order of the Thunderbolts by Marvel Comics. To create this reading guide, I've read the 339 issues that comprise the entire Thunderbolts run, including essential spin-offs and tie-ins, and I've used that to build a pictorial map of how to read it and where everything fits in. During the series, I sometimes use terms such as Type P or Type J readers or volumes with big or small V's. Basically, if you want to get used to how my videos work, I'd strongly recommend you check out some of the longer introductions for my larger reading series, such as the one I did for the DC New 52 here, which was almost 4,000 issues organized, or the one I did for the Top Cow Artifactiverse here, which was almost 1,000 issues. I'll link to them in the description below, but I'm not going to go over the details there because this is a relatively short 3 video guide. I don't want to go over old ground unnecessarily. So with no further ado, let's head back to our map here for the first time. In the last video, we had just finished up the Dark Reign era, which is this slightly complicated thing here in the middle where things kind of split and we had 2 parallel series on the go at the same time and so on and so forth. And we were about to dive into the comics that followed Siege and the end of the Dark Reign era, which is the Heroic Age era. The Heroic Age marks another new lineup of characters for the Thunderbolts and introduces Luke Cage as their leader. The first collection you can see here, that's what the cover looks like, is called Thunderbolts Cage, and it collects issues 144 to 147. It's pretty good. 147, or the issue 147, is a paraquel to Avengers Academy issues 3 and issues 4. In other words, it happens at the exact same time and it kind of ties in, but it can be read without reading Avengers Academy, so don't worry about that. The next collection is called Thunderbolts Shadowland. It collects issues 148 to 151. 148 and 149 are the Shadowland tie-ins, but they also stand alone fine. It does not require background knowledge of the Shadowland event at all, and hence that event isn't shown anywhere else on the wider map. You'll see on the map what I've been doing is putting in little thumbnails on the right-hand side to show what events you need to have some background knowledge of. I haven't thrown in Shadowland because it simply isn't necessary or important. You can just read this as is. So, as I said, 148 and 149 are Shadowland tie-in events. Issue 150 is an oversized anniversary issue that reprints Thunderbolts issue 1, just so you know. And I should mention that issue 151 is an origin story for Ghost that ends with the revelation of Hyperion joining the team. Now, that's not meant as a spoiler. The reason I mention it is you may find it useful at this point to do a quick Wikipedia search on the Hyperion character if you're not familiar with him, as his backstory is really quite complicated and could easily be an entire video of mine all by itself. In fact, let me know if you want me to do a video on Hyperion. The next collection is here, and it's called Thunderbolts Violent Rejections. It collects issues 152 to 157 and introduces the idea of a Thunderbolts backup team called the Underbolts, which I thought was quite interesting, but that doesn't really end up going anywhere as an idea. The next collection is this one, which is Thunderbolts Fear itself. It collects issues 158 to 162. Now, these events are all tie-ins to the Fear itself event, but it does not require background knowledge of the Fear itself event, much like Shadowland didn't. I can guarantee it doesn't require you to know anything about Fear itself because I personally not read Fear itself, and these issues made sense anyway. However, after reading them, I'm none the wiser as to what the hell Fear itself is about. I've no idea what that main event is, and I'm aware I really should read it one day. The next collection here is Thunderbolts The Great Escape. This contains issues 163 and then 163.1. Honestly, that's what it is. And then it contains issues 164 all the way up to 168. It's the start of kind of a time travel sub-arc, which itself was riddled by tropes. I wasn't a big fan, unfortunately. That then continues into the next collection, which has got this cover and is called Thunderbolts Like Lightning. It collects issues 169 to 174, and personally I thought this ended the time travel arc, but no such luck. Now, at this juncture, the map does something a bit odd. You'll see from this volume, we go down to this, which is Dark Avengers. Now, the map moves directly into a renaming of the series. And like I say, it gets called Dark Avengers, which is now the second volume with a big V of Dark Avengers after the Bendis Dark Avengers run we discussed last video. The important thing is this is only a renaming, not a renumbering. So the Dark Avengers series is going to begin with issue 175. Keep in mind that the last collection ended with Thunderbolts issue 174. So this now has issues Dark Avengers 175, just a renaming, not a renumbering. But before we talk about that, we need to understand something. Who the hell are these Dark Avengers and where did they come from? Well, to understand that, I'm afraid we're going to need to go all the way back up here on the map to where the last Dark Avengers series ended with the events of Siege. And we need to ask ourselves a question. What on earth happened to Norman Osborn? Now you'll notice here that there's a dotted line, which I've previously been ignoring. This dotted line goes all the way down here to a 5-issue miniseries written by Kelly Sue DeConnick called Osborn, Evil Incarcerated. This series is excellent, absolutely excellent, but it's only available as a trade paperback and it's also out of print and really hard to find. Now, this trade collection gives us some really useful and interesting context on Norman Osborn. But to then really understand where the Dark Avengers come from, we then need to follow this line down and read this. This is New Avengers Volume 2, that's volume with a big V, Volume 3, that's volume with a small v. Or another way of putting it is this is the second series of New Avengers, and it's the third collection or trade paperback collection within that New Avengers series. Now, this collection here, which you can see, it has this distinctive cover. It contains issues 16.1 and then issues 17 to 23. And in those issues, it contains Osborn's escape from prison and his new Dark Avengers team forming. Now, I know this feels like a really random thing for me to point out to you here, and it is, but there's a reason why. You see, this collection, the one we're looking at here, New Avengers Volume 2, Volume 3, if you know what I mean, is written by Brian Michael Bendis and is part of his famous Avengers run. Let's talk about his run for a second. The Bendis Avengers run actually started back in 2005 with Avengers Disassembled and frankly is what suddenly relaunched the Avengers. Before Bendis came on board, the Avengers were honestly a bit of a joke. I remember reading them in the 90s and finding the stories tedious and juvenile. I know, for those of you watching who are only familiar with the MCU movies, you'll find that hard to believe, but there we are. Now, Bendis began writing the team in 2005 with this disassembled story and pivoted the whole franchise to a cinematic widescreen approach to storytelling. In many ways, this Bendis Avengers era contained a lot of the DNA for the MCU. Anyway, after this, Bendis was writing 2 series, New Avengers and Mighty Avengers, which both wrapped up during Siege. After the events of Siege, he then relaunched the Avengers again with another series called New Avengers, and then another one as well, just called Avengers. And this is where this one collection comes in, back to the map here. Take a careful note of the cover of this standard size hardcover volume, as this series is collected quite confusingly, with a lot of the same covers being used for different physical collections. But that was a collecting story for another day. Look, do you know what? I'm going to be completely honest with you. I haven't read much of the Bendis Avengers run, even though I do own all of the physical hardcovers. As such, you can see on the map here that I can't really provide any guidance for where the Avengers series plugs in here or how it works or anything like that. I don't have an Avengers reading map and I don't plan on doing one unless people really want one. Are you interested in a reading map for Avengers? If so, let me know in the comments down below and I can get to work on it. Anyway, with these 2 detours out of the way, Osborn, Evil Incarcerated, and then this volume Avengers here, we can now finally start talking sensibly about Dark Avengers. Now, this is not only Dark Avengers Volume 2, where it's a volume with a big V. You need to remember this continues the numbering on from Thunderbolts, as well as continuing the same story as Thunderbolts. So in many ways, this is just a renaming and not a renumbering. I know, it is complicated. So this volume you can see here, this collection here, is called Dark Avengers, The End is the Beginning, and it collects issues 175 to 183. I have no idea why they use the Dark Avengers branding, as this follows straight on from the Thunderbolts. The time travel story I was talking about is finally resolved here, but it's still pretty rubbish. Anyway, um, this epic run of Thunderbolts, call it Volume 1 with a big V or call it the original series, whatever it is, it ends here with this collection you can see with this yellow cover and the flag and so on, which is Dark Avengers Masters of Evil. It collects issues 184 to 190. Now, this is an uninspiring story about Earth 13584, which ends up feeling like a dull Elseworlds or What If story. It's a squandered idea about AIM and the Sliver as well, so boo all round. Anyway, that represents the end of the first 190 Thunderbolts issues with various essential detours along the way. A word to the wise, if you're reading this in something like Marvel Unlimited, once you get to issue 174, you will then have to look separately for Dark Avengers issue 175 to carry on your Thunderbolts run. Totally annoying. Okay, well, let's carry on. But before we do, I just want to point out that this line here is dotted for a reason, because I want to highlight the next series of Thunderbolts, or the next volume with a big V of Thunderbolts, is totally optional. It's so unrelated to the Thunderbolts, you can completely ignore reading it and you will not miss a single thing. I know that sounds like a bold thing for me to say, but let me explain. So the next series of Thunderbolts, or volume with a big V if you want, Volume 2, resets with an issue 1. As well as that, I will point out that the whole of Volume 2 is a series that's over here on the side, because frankly, it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with the Thunderbolts. It could have been called anything. Red Hulk and his gang of misfits, maybe. In fact, as I recall, no one even uses the word Thunderbolts in it until like issue 15 or something. The reason this series launched was because it was part of the Marvel Now initiative, and so a new Thunderbolt series was launched featuring a new team, led by Red Hulk, and then including Deadpool, Elektra, Venom, and Punisher. The series lasted 32 issues and had amazing cover art, which you'll see in a second. But don't let that fool you like it did me. It's not great. So let's go here. This is Thunderbolts Collection One. It's called No Quarter. It collects issues 1 to 6 of the second series and is written by Daniel Way. It's an unimpressive story, and it makes the odd choice of adding the character Mercy to the roster. I would recommend strongly not trying to read up on Mercy on Wikipedia or anything else. She's a weird character with a really confusing and weird history, and if you try looking it up on Wikipedia, it's just going to confuse matters. Just accept her as it is. Try and be a bit of a type J reader if you can. Go with the flow. The next collection of this series of Thunderbolts is here, and it's called Red Scare. It collects issues 7 to 12. Issue 12 is by the new writer, Charles Soule, who joins at that point. Now, this volume as a whole continues the last arc. It's not good, but again, the cover art is amazing. The third collection is this one here, which is called Thunderbolts Volume 3 Infinity. It collects issues 13 and 19, and it does require some background knowledge of the Infinity event you can see me pointing out here. Now, it's also a much better read than the previous arc. The fact it's an Infinity tie-in doesn't require detailed event knowledge, but you do need to know a bit about how the event resolves to understand why some key events in this collection, Thunderbolts Infinity, actually happen. So you can Wikipedia it if you want. Infinity itself as an event isn't too interesting, so whatever suits you, to be honest. By the way, if you're an Inhumans fan, it was really surprising to me to see that this is where the Inhumans character lineage originated. I had no idea. I'm not sure I enjoyed it either. I was a bit unhappy with how his origins turned out. But anyway, this is where his origins are. If you're not an Inhumans fan, then ignore everything I just said. Moving on, the next collection is this one here, which is Thunderbolts: A Chance in Hell. Again, it's pretty good. And to be honest, I quite enjoyed David Soule's Deadpool characterization in this. I'm not really much of a Deadpool fan, so that was quite new for me. Although this arc does have a pretty MacGuffin-y reset or retcon at the end, which was kind of like, oh, what's the point? And then finally, we have Thunderbolts Volume 5, which I'm afraid you can't really read it clearly here, but it says Thunderbolts Volume 5, Punisher versus the Thunderbolts. It collects annual 13 and then issue 27 to 32 in that order. So this is written by Ben Acker and Ben Blacker. No, really, that's the names of the writers. And it's actually pretty good. The change in art style to a more Western manga look is also quite enjoyable, for me at least, because I quite like that art. And it resolves the long-running leader subplot quite well. And it ends the series very clearly. Now, again, we have a dotted line here, and the reason for that is, like I said, whether you view that series as part of the Thunderbolts properly is up to you. If you want, you can skip it entirely, and you will not even notice. I can't stress enough that this series only uses the name and nothing else. So anyway, whether you read that or skipped it, we're now going to move back into proper Thunderbolts Volume 3, and that's a volume with a big V. But before we do, let's just reset ourselves here. So up here, we had Dark Avengers. Then we took our detour and we went down the Thunderbolts, the second series there. But if you don't want to do that detour, or hey, even if you do, after Dark Avengers, you're going to need to read the event Standoff, which is also subtitled Assault on Pleasant Hill. The reason for that is you require full background knowledge of the Standoff event for what comes next. I cannot stress that enough. You have to read Standoff or you are not going to understand what happens next. If you don't want to read Standoff, you're going to have to read the Wikipedia article in quite some detail, or else you just won't understand the next thing we're going to be talking about. And the next thing we're going to be talking about is this, which is Thunderbolts Series 3, Volume 1, volume with a small v. It's called There Is No High Road. It collects issues 1 to 6 and is written by Zeb Wells. It's okay. It has a cameo from Squadron Supreme and the Inhumans, both of which are pretty worthless. Interesting as well, it also has, as you'll remember me mentioning in a previous video, it also mentions Civil War 2 a little bit. You don't need to know much about Civil War 2 to actually understand it. In fact, each issue starts off with a summary page that explains what you need to know to cover the essentials. But the Civil War 2 stuff does end with a key plot point that's going to affect the later issues, so you need to have some interest in it. But it's all set at the same time here. Weirdly, I'm going to point out a lot of online guides say that this volume only collects issues 1 to 5. It doesn't. It collects issues 1 to 6. You heard it here first. Anyway, after reading that, you then move on here to this collection, which is called Thunderbolts Volume 2, No Going Back. This contains issues 7 to 12 and is the end of that series. It requires some pretty seriously detailed background knowledge of the event you can see on the right here, which is Secret Empire. Otherwise, it's going to spoil Secret Empire quite drastically for you. So I would strongly recommend you read Secret Empire first before you read this. To be honest, Secret Empire is actually like really, really good, so it's worth reading. But the Thunderbolts issues are really closely integrated into it. One thing I will point out is that although this contains issues 7 to 12 and then the series ends, the series ends with absolutely zero closure. Like not even cliffhanger. It's just like this is just an issue and there needs to be an issue after it. It's ridiculous. But there we are, and that is the final Thunderbolts issue. I'm just going to pan out for a bit and give us a slightly broader look at our map. This is the entire map, 339 single issues, all the tie-ins and spin-offs included as well. That's the entire reading map, ladies and gentlemen. I do want to make 2 honourable mentions. Firstly, I have heard on the grapevine that the Thunderbolts continues in Punisher, in terms of the series that was the 2018 series. The third collection in that series is called Street by Street, Block by Block, and collects issues 12 to 16. Apparently the Thunderbolts turn up in that. I haven't read it, so if anyone here watching it has read it, then sound off in the comments below, let me know. Finally, I'm also aware there's a Thunderbolts appearance in the 3-issue Marvel Top Cow crossover event called Fusion, which also stars the Avengers, as well as the Thunderbolts, and then also Hunter Killer and Cyberforce from the Top Cow universe. I mentioned this in my 11-part video guide of the entire Top Cow Artifactiverse you can see here, and the link to that specific video will be in the description below. Anyway, just thought you might want to know. So back to the map here. Here it is. Feel free to download it. Feel free to follow it along. What did you think? Did you find this guide useful? And are you planning on picking up the omnibuses? Let me know. Be interested to see what everyone's up to. As always, this map is available on my website for you to download free of charge. If you want to download or print it out, please do so. You can also stick it on a tablet or a smartphone, open it with a PDF reader and follow on like that. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter where I post daily reviews of whatever half dozen or so comics I've read that day. So it's a good way to see what I'm up to and to get an idea for what my plans are for future videos. you want to support the channel, please head over to Amazon and pick up the first volume of my prose episodic novel, No Gods or Kings. It's a story about superheroes in a world like our own, but much more realistic and gritty. It's planned as a series of 9 novels, and the first 4 are already out. They cost less than $1 each and are free if you have Kindle Unlimited. If you'd like to read a free excerpt of them, the first chapter of the first book can be found on the same website as this reading map, which is nogodsorkings.com. The link to that is in the description below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, stay classy.